The Iranian foreign minister welcomed the Russian initiative and the Syrian decision concerning chemical weapons. Russia, a new disembarkation ship enters the Mediterranean at the end of this month. And protests escalate in Turkey against the criminal and oppressive practices of Erdogan's forces. Good afternoon, this is news in English from the Syrian Arab television in Damascus. The Minister of Information Omran Azobi asserted that Syria is committed to the Russian-American plan about chemical weapons in Syria once it is approved by the United Nations. In an interview with the RTN British TV channel, he asserted that Syria started to prepare its document concerning this question. Syria would apply this plan when it becomes something tangible in the light of a resolution issued by the UN Security Council, pointing out that Syria would facilitate the task of the United Nations inspectors within the context of this agreement between Washington and Moscow. Egyptian Foreign Minister Nabil Fahmy stressed the importance of his country's cooperation with Russia to solve the Syrian crisis and the necessity of holding Geneva II conference with the participation of all the sides concerned. Fahmy clarified in a joint press conference with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov in Moscow the importance of making the Middle East an area free of weapons of mass destruction. The Egyptian Foreign Minister clarified that the army move in Sinai is to fight terrorism, as the Egyptian government is working to implement the law and enhance the security and stability in the country. Lavrov on his part asserted on fighting terrorism wherever it is, whether by force or through the United Nations and the international organizations. Lavrov clarified the issue of the chemical weapons in Syria, saying that some did not understand the decisions agreed upon with the United States in this regard, as the 7th chapter will never be taken into consideration at this point. Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif asserted that the Russian initiative and the Syrian decision concerning the chemical weapons showed wisdom, so the language of the American officials has become worn out. He asserted that the solution of the crisis in Syria would only be political through dialogue, and that the future of Syria would be determined only by the Syrian people. In an interview with Al Mayadeen TV channel, Mr. Zarif said America had no right to use the language of threats with other states. He declared Iran's welcome to any efforts to stop violence in this region, which should be void of mass destruction weapons. He asserted once more that Iran has information proving that the terrorist gangs in Syria used chemical weapons. The General Commander of Iran's Revolutionary Guards, Muhammad Ali Jafari, asserted that the failure of the plot of a military aggression on Syria represents a new defeat for the enemies. He asserted that these enemies plotted to attack Syria, but their plot failed. Their plots against Iran would also fail. General Jafari also asserted that Iran occupies a very good position in the international arena. Everybody witnessed the series of defeats suffered by the savage enemies. The Americans deployed their military power near Iran's borders, claiming to besiege it. However, they failed. The press office of the Russian Black Sea Navy announced that the disembarkation ship Yamal would enter the Mediterranean Sea at the end of this month. The crew of this ship carried out exercises to open fire on air and maritime targets. The Russian Navy had announced that it would increase its presence in the Mediterranean because of the escalating tension in the region. In Damascus countryside, a Syrian Arab army unit repulsed the terrorists of Jabhat al-Nusra in the area of Malula and the western side of the city, destroying their heavy machine guns and their weapons. They called and wounded terrorists groups in al-Zabadani plain and the eastern mountains. Groups of terrorists were also destroyed in several other areas around the city. In the eastern Ghouta, our forces destroyed a mortar gun in Adra and killed at least 20 terrorists, most of them non-Syrians, including a number of their leaders. Turkish businessmen asserted in the website of Mahalif Gazitaf that terrorist gangs are stealing the equipment of Syrian factories and smuggling them into Turkey.
This is a systematic piracy across the borders carried out by armed terrorists under directives from Erdogan, the thief of Aleppo. The Turkish businessmen in southeastern Turkey called upon their government to find a solution for the illegal products of the stolen factories from Syria. Other stolen parts are being sold in Istanbul and other cities in western Turkey. The Turkish businessmen pointed out that the terrorists of the so-called Al-Nusra Front were smuggling the stolen equipment across the border, thus inflicting damage on neighboring Syria. Last year, the Syrian Minister of Foreign Affairs addressed 2 letters to the chairman of the UN Security Council and the UN Secretary General, calling for an international reaction to curb the great damage inflicted on the Syrian people and their economic and trade capacities. The Union of the Syrian Chambers of Industry filed an international judiciary case against the Turkish government, represented by its leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan, accusing him of carrying out a systematic destruction of the Syrian economy and plundering the Aleppo factories.
In Turkey, demonstrations calling to overthrow Erdogan's government escalated as activists of Istanbul Park organized a rally under the title Justice, Freedom and Peace in September, in which hundreds of thousands of protesters gathered in Kadıköy Square in Istanbul.
Demonstrators carried pictures of the 6 victims of the uprising who were killed by Erdogan's troops. The protesters also chanted slogans holding Erdogan and his party as responsible for the killing of the demonstrators and the acquittal of the killers. As the voices of the protesters shouted slogans describing the Justice and Development Party as a murderer, the number of Erdogan's militia increased to commit the worst forms of terrorism against demonstrators. The clashes between protesters and Erdogan's forces escalated in all the streets of Istanbul. Meanwhile, demonstrators and riot police faced off for a 6th straight night in the southern city of Ankara, where police again used tear gas against the protesters who had blocked off a street with barricades that were set on fire. The clashes across the country have increased after a 22-year-old protester and 5 others were killed by Erdogan's police.
In Homs, Dr. Fayrouz al-Musa, a member of the regional leadership of the Ba'ath Arab Socialist Party, toured the examination centers in the colleges of engineering, the musical faculty and the centers of students' admission in Ba'ath University. She joined the students in a sit-in to condemn the aggression on Syria. She also visited a number of roadblocks erected by the Syrian army in the governorate of Homs. In Latakia, the Minister of Higher Education toured the examination centers in a number of faculties in Tashrin University. He stressed the necessity of exerting more efforts to take care of student affairs and to facilitate their work. Ahead of the national vaccination campaign for the current year, which will be launched during the next months of October and November, Minister of Health Dr. Saad al-Naif emphasized the ministry continued its coordination with the international organizations in order to provide the vaccines to Syrian children who were forced by the terrorist armed groups to flee to neighboring countries, indicating that the annual cost of vaccine amount to 5 billion Syrian pounds, and these vaccines are available in all health centers despite the current circumstances in Syria. Dr. al-Naif said that 11 types of vaccines are provided that would help prevent various dangerous diseases that hit children, as well as medicine for the patients with chronic and common diseases such as hepatitis, tuberculosis and others, and they are all to be distributed for free in all health centers. With this, we reach the end of our news for today. Thank you for watching. For more details about Syria and the region and to view this bulletin again, you can always visit our website in English, www.syriaonline.sy. Now stay with us for the latest in the world of business and market with Vani Konesian, but after a break.
Good afternoon. The Ministry of State for Environmental Affairs signed with the General Authority for Remote Sensing a memorandum of cooperation to carry out the project of monitoring and controlling gusty storms in Syria and to launch the National Environmental Observatory project in Damascus countryside. Minister of the Environment confirmed that as a result of the drought which hit the region recently, it was necessary to develop plans to reduce its effects on the environment. The minister pointed out that joint studies between the Ministry of State for Environmental Affairs and the General Authority for Remote Sensing started with the aim of developing means to protect the environment. Minister of Work asserted that the ministry works on modifying the Basic Workers' Law through the General Administrative Economic and Service Rules so that the new law would include many incentives to improve performance and salaries. The Director General of the Storage and Marketing Establishment pointed to the government's intention to prepare several locations to be selling halls in order to provide the citizens' needs, pointing out that the establishment has already started renovating some halls. He asserted that the establishment has sufficient reserves, most of which are foodstuffs. He added that the prices are cheaper than those of the market by 15 to 40%. The Cooperative Agricultural Bank's manager asserted that the bank's keenness to deliver fertilizers to farmers, according to the costs that are based upon the workers' wage, in addition to providing warehouses and transporting money and the fertilizers from the company's warehouses to the bank's ones, pointing out that these costs would be added to the company's prices. And now over to the exchange rates according to the bulletin of the Central Bank of Syria. With this we conclude our news. Thank you for watching and goodbye.